Have you ever stopped to realize that everything around you, the screen you're watching this on, the roof over your head, even the food on your table, exists because of one invisible invention? Not fire, not the wheel, not electricity. Money. It runs the world. It decides wars, builds nations, and breaks empires. And yet, for something so powerful, money isn't even real, at least not in the way we think. Right now, you could open an app, tap a few numbers, and poof, a transaction happens. No gold, no silver, no paper bills changing hands. Just trust, a shared belief that a few digits on a screen are worth something. But it wasn't always this easy. Before banks, before coins, before even writing existed, people struggled to trade. If you had wheat and needed shoes, you had to find a shoemaker who wanted wheat. And if he didn't, you waited, you bargained, you hoped. Barter worked, barely, but it was slow, messy, and limited. Humanity needed something bigger, something that could hold value, store it, and move it without depending on chance. Something people could believe in. That's how money was born, not as treasure, but as trust. From clay tablets buried in ancient temples, to shells that traveled across oceans, to shiny metal stamped by kings. Each version of money solved an old problem and created a new one. Because every time money evolved, it rewired how humans lived, worked, and even thought. When gold backed empires, wars were fought over it. When paper replaced metal, economies expanded and inflated. When credit cards and digital banking appeared, we handed control of money to invisible systems that never sleep. And now, for the first time in history, a new kind of money challenges all of that. A currency born not from governments or banks, but from code. Bitcoin. To some, it's freedom, digital gold for a new age. To others, it's chaos, a threat to stability itself. But the truth is, Bitcoin isn't the end of the story. It's just the latest chapter in a 5,000-year-long experiment, one that began with simple trades and evolved into algorithms shaping the future of civilization. So how did we get here? How did humanity go from swapping livestock to swiping cards to mining digital coins in cyberspace? To answer that, we need to rewind all the way back to a time before money even existed, when trust was personal, trade was survival, and the first currencies were born out of desperation, not design. This is the real story of money, from barter to Bitcoin, from dusty markets to digital ledgers, and how a single human invention continues to decide who holds power and who doesn't.
Before money existed, every trade was a puzzle. You had to find someone who wanted what you had, and had what you wanted. Picture this: a farmer with baskets of wheat, and a potter who makes clay jars. The farmer needs pots to store his grain, but the potter doesn't want wheat, he wants wool. So now the farmer has to find a shepherd who wants wheat and is willing to trade wool, just so he can get the pots he originally needed. That's the barter system. And it worked, sort of, when communities were small and everyone knew each other. But as societies grew, barter became a nightmare of negotiations. What if the other person didn't need what you offered? What if your goods spoiled before you could trade them? And how do you set fair value between two completely different things? Say, a goat and a pile of grain. Barter couldn't scale. It was slow, limited, and built entirely on coincidence. Trade needed something better, something universal that everyone would accept even if they didn't need it right away. Something that could store value, represent worth, and make trade simple. And that's when humanity stumbled upon a powerful idea: the symbol of value. At first, it wasn't coins or paper. It was something much simpler: a record. Instead of trading objects, people began keeping track of who owed what and when. Debt became the first real currency. In ancient villages and temples, people started writing these promises down on clay, bone, and stone. Each mark represented trust, a promise that something valuable would be delivered later. It might not sound dramatic, but that shift from physical exchange to recorded debt changed human history. It allowed trade to grow beyond personal relationships. You didn't need to know someone to do business with them anymore. You just needed to trust the record. Money, in its earliest form, wasn't gold or silver. It was information, a system for remembering who owed what. And those records, scratched into clay over 5,000 years ago, would become the foundation of something far greater, the first financial system. But that system had a weakness. Clay tablets can store trust, but they can't travel. And trade was about to spread far beyond the temple walls. So people began searching for something new, something they could carry, count, and trade anywhere. Something that would feel valuable in their hands. And that search led to the next great leap in human history, the birth of commodity money.
Long before coins glittered in royal hands, money lived in clay. Around 5,000 years ago, in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, trade was booming. Farmers, herders, and merchants needed ways to keep track of grain, livestock, and promises. And that's where the first great innovation appeared, the ledger. Inside temples, which acted as early banks, scribes used sharp reeds to carve numbers and names into wet clay tablets. Each tablet told a story: who owed grain, who repaid it, and who was still in debt. These weren't just receipts. They were trust contracts, baked into clay. A farmer might owe 10 measures of barley to the temple, due after harvest. A merchant might borrow silver to fund a caravan. Once written, those records became permanent and enforceable. You didn't need to carry the goods around. The temple's word was enough. This was revolutionary. For the first time, value didn't need to be in your hand. It just needed to be on record. Money had turned into information. And as odd as it sounds, that clay ledger system worked for centuries. It was precise, centralized, and deeply trusted. Temples became financial hubs, storing both wealth and faith. The priests who managed the ledgers were part banker, part accountant, part God's representative. If you think about it, that's not too far from how our modern banking system works today, a trusted institution holding the numbers that define our lives. But there was still a problem. Those clay ledgers could track wealth, but they couldn't move it. A debt recorded in one city meant nothing to traders halfway across the desert. Trade was expanding. Caravans were crossing mountains and seas. The economy needed something portable, a universal token that could represent value anywhere without a scribe or a tablet to prove it. People wanted something they could touch, something they could weigh, trade, and trust instantly. So the world started experimenting with objects that had value on their own, things that everyone agreed were precious. And that's how humanity stepped into the age of commodity money, where everything from shells to salt to cattle became the currency of civilization.
As trade spread beyond villages and temples, people needed value they could carry, not just record. Numbers on clay were great for local deaths, but useless in a distant marketplace. So humanity did what it always does when faced with a problem. It improvised. Different cultures began assigning value to physical things, objects that everyone recognized as desirable. Cattle, salt, spices, beads, and shells all became forms of money. In Africa and Asia, cowrie shells shimmered in trade for over 1,000 years. They were durable, portable, and difficult to counterfeit, small treasures that could slip into a hand or pocket. In ancient Rome, salt was so vital that soldiers were partly paid in it, giving birth to the word salary. In parts of the Pacific, enormous stone discs called rye stones served as money even though they were too heavy to move. Ownership changed through community consensus, proving that money doesn't need to move to have meaning. Each society picked what mattered most to them, but the idea was the same. Money became a shared belief.
The worth of a cow or a shell wasn't in the object itself, it was in the trust people placed in it. That shared belief turned everyday goods into tools of trade, and those tools fueled expansion. With portable value, trade routes flourished, markets grew, empires rose. But as wealth crossed borders, another problem appeared. Different regions used different commodities, and value shifted wildly from place to place. A sack of salt in one city might buy you a meal, in another, a mansion. And how do you measure value when your money can spoil, rot, or break? Traders needed something more consistent, something universal, durable, and easy to divide. That's when people began turning their eyes to metal. Gold, silver, copper, these were beautiful, scarce, and could be shaped into exact weights. Metals didn't decay. They gleamed. They carried a sense of permanence, even power. And soon, kings and empires realized something crucial. If you stamp your symbol on metal, people won't just see money, they'll see authority. The next leap in the history of money was about to begin, and it would come from a small kingdom that forever changed the way humans measured wealth. The birthplace of the first coins, Lydia.
Around 2,600 years ago, in a small kingdom called Lydia, what we now know as Western Turkey, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in history, money had a face. Lydian craftsmen began stamping small metal discs made of electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver. Each coin bore an image, often a roaring lion, the symbol of royal power, and that stamp changed everything. Until then, traders had to weigh every piece of metal to check its worth. Now, with a single royal mark, a coin carried guaranteed value. You didn't have to trust the person you traded with, you trusted the mark of the king. That was the magic of coinage. It turned trust from something personal into something institutional. Each coin was a miniature promise backed by a ruler, a government, or an empire. And the world noticed. Greek city-states adopted coins next, then the Persians, then the Romans, until metal money became the backbone of global trade. Coins flowed across borders, languages, and cultures, uniting economies that had never met. For ordinary people, coins were freedom. They could buy, sell, save, and travel with their wealth in their own hands. For rulers, coins were control. They could tax in their own currency, pay soldiers, and display their faces on every piece of metal in circulation, a silent reminder of who truly held power. But like every form of money, coins came with a hidden cost. As wars broke out and treasuries emptied, kings discovered they could debase their coins, mixing in cheaper metals while keeping the same royal stamp. The coins looked the same, but their value quietly eroded, and every time that happened, trust, the foundation of money itself, cracked. Yet despite manipulation and inflation, coinage spread like wildfire. Metal money was durable, divisible, and portable. Everything barter and clay tablets weren't. For over 1,000 years, coins ruled the world. They built empires, funded wars, and filled temples with gold. But as trade expanded beyond borders, merchants ran into a new challenge. Carrying bags of metal across continents was heavy, risky, and slow. Thieves loved it. Armies looted it. Governments taxed it. Something lighter, faster, and easier to move was needed. And once again, innovation came from the East, from a civilization that would change the way humanity thought about value. The next revolution wasn't made of metal, but paper.
Imagine walking through the bustling markets of ancient China 1,000 years ago. Traders shout prices, spices fill the air, silk glimmers in the sunlight, but something's missing. No clinking coins. Instead, merchants are exchanging paper. This was Song Dynasty China, the 11th century, and the birth of paper money. At first, it started small.
Rich merchants would leave their heavy coins with trusted deposit houses and receive promissory notes, slips of paper that guaranteed payment later. It was convenience that started it, but it was trust that made it work. Before long, the government saw the potential. They began issuing official paper currency called jiaozi. These were backed by the state and accepted across the empire, a remarkable leap in financial innovation. The concept was revolutionary. Money no longer needed to be metal. It didn't need to be heavy, shiny, or mined from the earth. It could exist as an idea, written on paper, as long as people believed in it. But paper, unlike gold, could be printed infinitely. And that's where things went wrong. Dynasties rose and fell, and with every financial crisis, rulers printed more notes to pay debts, fund wars, or buy loyalty. The value of paper crumbled, inflation soared, people lost faith. Yet the idea of credit, of creating value from trust and promise, refused to die. It crossed mountains, sailed oceans, and arrived in medieval Europe centuries later. By the Renaissance, Italian banking families like the Medici had mastered it. They built vast networks using letters of credit, allowing merchants to trade across continents without carrying gold at all. A piece of paper could move wealth faster than any caravan or ship. And that changed everything. It was no longer about gold or silver. It was about confidence. Confidence in the bank, the system, and the idea that someone, somewhere, would honor that promise. That invisible thread of trust powered global trade. Empires grew rich not just from gold mines, but from paper promises. And soon entire nations would build their power on something even more abstract, the promise of debt. But as money became more symbolic, it also became more fragile. Because what happens when the promise breaks? When paper outpaces value? When trust, once again, is tested? That question would lead to the next great transformation, one born not from merchants or monarchs, but from the rise of modern banking in the industrial world. By the 17th century, the world was changing faster than ever. Ships were crossing oceans, empires were rising, and wars were being fought on a global scale. But behind every empire, behind every cannon, colony, and crown, there was money, and the way it moved was about to transform again. The heart of this revolution began in London and Amsterdam, where merchants and monarchs alike needed a safer, smarter system to manage their growing wealth. The answer came in the form of banks. Not the old money lenders hiding behind ledgers, but powerful new institutions that could create money out of trust. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, was the first of its kind, a public bank that issued banknotes backed by the government. People could deposit gold and received paper promises redeemable for that gold. But soon, something subtle and world-changing happened. Not everyone came back for their gold. The banks realized that as long as people believed their gold was safe, they didn't need to keep all of it in their vaults. They could lend out the rest. And that's how fractional reserve banking was born. Money was no longer just something you held. It was something banks could create through loans, interest, and debt. It was an illusion that worked because everyone agreed to believe in it. And that belief fueled progress. Loans funded factories, trade routes, and revolutions. Paper wealth built railways, powered industry, and turned tiny kingdoms into global powers. But the same system that built fortunes could destroy them. When confidence wavered, when wars, speculation, or corruption shook the system, entire economies crumbled overnight. Bank runs, depressions, and financial panics became part of modern life. The 1800s saw it all: booms that created millionaires and crashes that ruined nations. The Industrial Revolution didn't just produce steam engines and steel. It created financial machines capable of both immense creation and catastrophic collapse.
And as global trade expanded, so did the need for something universal, a single standard of value that could tie the world together. That's when the world turned to the gold standard, a system where every paper note could, in theory, be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold. It was meant to bring stability, but in reality, it chained nations to the limits of their reserves. Wars, inflation, and debt soon made it impossible to keep. By the 20th century, the illusion cracked again. The Great Depression, 2 world wars, and a global financial reset that would give rise to a new kind of empire, not ruled by kings or gold, but by central banks, currencies, and trust on a global scale. Because now, money wasn't just in vaults or notes. It lived in the system, in banks, markets, and ledgers, invisible to the average person. But even this new system had limits. As technology evolved and people began questioning who really controlled their money, a radical idea started to form: a digital alternative, free from banks and governments. And that's where the next chapter begins, when money left paper and went digital.
By the late 20th century, money had become almost invisible. The metallic clink of coins was replaced by the soft beep of a card. Paychecks turned into numbers on screens. And with the rise of the internet, we entered a new age, where money no longer needed to exist in physical form at all. Banks went online. Transactions became instant. Credit cards, wire transfers, and digital ledgers made cash feel like an antique. But as our world became more connected, people began to see the cracks. Every transaction flowed through a middleman, a bank, a corporation, or a government that could freeze, track, or manipulate your money with a single click. The 2008 financial crisis exposed this fragility. When the world's biggest banks collapsed under their own greed, millions lost their homes, jobs, and savings, all because of systems they couldn't control. Confidence in traditional money hit rock bottom. And then, out of the chaos, an idea appeared. A mysterious figure named Satoshi Nakamoto published a paper online titled "Bitcoin, a Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash System." It was only 9 pages long, but it would change money forever. The idea was simple, yet radical. What if money didn't need banks? What if trust came not from governments, but from mathematics? Bitcoin was born in 2009, a digital currency that ran on blockchain technology, a decentralized ledger that recorded every transaction transparently and permanently. No middleman, no central authority, just a network of users verifying each other. For the first time in history, money was truly free. At first, hardly anyone cared. A few programmers mined coins on their laptops, trading them for pennies or pizza. But slowly, the world began to notice. Bitcoin couldn't be printed like paper. It couldn't be inflated or seized by governments. It was borderless, global, and driven by trust in code, not people. As its price began to rise, so did the movement behind it. A generation disillusioned by banks and bureaucracy saw Bitcoin as a financial rebellion, a way to take control back from systems that had failed them. And soon, the revolution spread. Other cryptocurrencies followed: Ethereum, Litecoin, Dogecoin, each expanding the vision of decentralized finance. By the 2020s, billions of dollars were flowing through blockchain networks every day. Some called it the future of money. Others called it a bubble. Governments scrambled to catch up. Banks tried to adapt. And the very idea of what money is began to shift once again. Because now, it wasn't just about coins or paper or even numbers in a bank. It was about data, encrypted, decentralized,
and constantly moving. Bitcoin had done more than create a new currency. It had challenged the foundation of money itself, the idea that trust must come from power. And as the world stood divided between tradition and innovation, one question loomed larger than ever. If money can exist without governments or banks, who really controls value now?
For 5,000 years, money has evolved with us. From stones and shells, to metal and paper, to code and cryptography, it has always been more than just currency. It's a reflection of who we are and what we believe in. Today, that reflection is changing faster than ever. The lines between money, technology, and identity are beginning to blur. Artificial intelligence now predicts markets, manages portfolios, and even trades on its own. Blockchain networks move trillions without banks, and central banks themselves are experimenting with digital currencies, trying to adapt before they become obsolete. But with every new leap comes an ancient question. Can we still trust it? Because money, no matter its form, has always been built on belief. Belief that a coin is worth its metal. Belief that paper represents value. Belief that digital code can hold our future. Now, as algorithms begin to decide what's valuable, the very definition of money is shifting again. It's becoming faster, smarter, and more intimate, tracking not just what we buy, but who we are. Digital wallets have replaced pockets. Crypto keys replace bank accounts. And soon, your data itself, your habits, your choices, your digital identity could become a new kind of currency. But here's the truth. Technology may change the tools, but the story never changes. Every generation faces the same challenge: to balance trust and power, innovation and control. We've come a long way from bartering cattle in ancient villages. Yet, in a way, we're still doing the same thing, trading value for value, trust for trust, belief for belief. And as we stand on the edge of a new financial frontier, where money might soon exist entirely in code or even thought, the next chapter isn't written by kings or bankers anymore. It's written by us. Because the real story of money isn't just about coins, paper, or Bitcoin. It's about humanity's endless search for something we can all agree has value, even if we can't hold it in our hands. And maybe the future of money won't just change what we buy, but what we believe in. If you enjoyed this journey through the 5,000-year story of money, make sure to subscribe because the next chapter is already being written right now. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.